Greetings. This is your Congressman, Ted Poe. Slavery is still happening today, right here in our own backyards in Houston, Texas. It's called human sex trafficking, and it's also in towns across the entire United States. This month is National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month, so it's vital that mothers and fathers understand the crime of human trafficking. Some people don't realize the crime of trafficking happens right here in our neighborhood. Traffickers pick up girls at the shopping malls, pretending to be a friend or a boyfriend, and slowly gain trust until they have control. Then the trafficker holds the victims hostage with threats and abuse until they submit to being sex slaves. Sometimes massage parlors or nail salons are also locations where human trafficking occurs. Some traditional businesses are actually fronts for child prostitution. Young women and girls are held and forced to have sex for money. That filthy lucre goes to the slave trader. This crime happens in far-off places. It happens in America. Victims are both domestic and international, and they are trafficked for sex or labor. Some are trafficked from overseas into the United States. I've been to Honduras and Guatemala, Costa Rica, and Peru, and seen the trafficking of minors in those countries. These victims come to the United States with the promise of a good job, but when they arrive, their passports are seized by their trafficker. Then they are forced into terrible, abusive working conditions and prostitution. It's sex slavery, labor slavery. There are also those that are trafficked right from our own neighborhoods for sexual servitude. As many as 100,000 children are at risk for sexual exploitation every year in the United States. Worldwide, trafficking is a billion-dollar industry, $32 billion a year, second behind the drug business. Human trafficking is different than other types of trafficking because guns and drugs and other possessions can only be sold once, while a girl can be sold numerous times. These girls are sometimes branded by their traffickers with tattoos to show who owns them. The New York Times reported that a girl in New York had a barcode put on her body by the slave owner. Barcodes, the sign of slave property. We must do all we can to combat this despicable crime of human trafficking. So there are 3 steps to remember. 1, rescue and restore victims and treat those victims, not as criminals. 2, prosecute all those involved, and that includes the seller and the buyer. And 3, raise awareness in our community about this scourge. Unfortunately, our home of Houston, Texas is a major hub for trafficking because of our interstates, ports, airports, our proximity to the border, and our extensive migrant community. Houston also hosts a number of large conventions, sporting events, and festivals. And these large-scale events make it appealing to traffickers to recruit and hide victims. Thankfully, in our community of Houston, Texas, our community has been very active and motivated to come together to help stop the crime of trafficking. Law enforcement, government officials, nonprofits, religious groups, and individuals are joining together to educate the community, lock up the outlaws, and restore victims forced into this life. Fortunately, communities around our great country are following Houston's example and opening their eyes to the fact that human trafficking is happening. So within our active community, how can you help? Well, awareness is the first step. Take time to learn about this crime and talk to neighbors and family about it. Once you know the signs of trafficking, you could potentially help a child victim. There is also a National Human Trafficking Resource Center that has a hotline to help victims. The phone number is 1-888-373-7888. The Harris County Sheriff's Office also has an anonymous tip line called I Watch Harris County, which can be accessed through a smartphone app or online. In Congress, many of us are working to fight this crime. I recently introduced the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act along with Congressman Carolyn Maloney, a Democrat from New York, Senator John Cornyn from our great state of Texas, and Oregon Democrat Senator Wyden have introduced the same bill in the Senate. This bill, the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act, focuses on rescuing domestic victims, tracking down the exploiters, and prosecuting everyone criminally responsible for this modern-day slavery. It funds the resources by allowing judges to order sex offenders to put money into a fund that goes to help the victims. Crooks should literally pay the rent on the courthouse. They should have to pay for their slave trade business. This bill is critical to help fighting trafficking within our borders. Slavery was supposed to end in the United States in 1865, but it has not. The new form of slavery destroys the hope and dignity of children. It helps and attempts to steal the very souls from our girls. America must rescue these victims and give them a life and prosecute the demand and the traffickers. Put these criminals in the jailhouse where they belong. Help the victims. And that's just the way it is.